Alright, hello everybody. My name is David or Panda, whatever you know me by. This could be hopefully somewhat quick video on Paladin Forge Warrior Spectres. Immediate disclaimer, I'm not a professional build creator. I merely want to bring up some better builds in case you're actually here for something to, take you through the Atlas or something to get in during the League of Phrecia, whatever it is. We're gonna just mention right now, White Dollars, Ancestral Commander Spectres, super tanky, very well built. Some of the items are a little scary. He got kind of blown up in the comments because he didn't mention like what prices his items were. I'm gonna tell you right now that my build's probably the same, if not a little teeny bit more investment, or at least a little bit more work for less tankiness. So immediately go over there that build, do that instead. Waffles loves ARPGs, antiquarian specters, also pretty tanky, a little bit cheaper. I'm not sure because the stands blew up like over the weekend, but that's also a really good build, way better than mine. He can do T17s on his. I can kind of do them if I feel like it. So yeah, do that instead. And lastly, Gazzy's Paladin Spectres League Starter. He kind of baited everybody with this because I think he swapped to like 3 different builds when he actually started the league. But if you want somebody that actually makes guides, Gazzy's your man. Paladin Spectres, hit him up. Okay, now that's out the way, we're going to talk about the kind of main point of the build, and that's that we're using Forge Warrior Spectres. These guys are basically Crush Claws, the old crabby dudes on crack. They have almost 2 times the amount of base damage, so to speak, on their attacks. They only have 2 different attacks. They have their default attack, which is just a nice normal melee swing. It converts 75% of physical to cold, and a second attack, which every 4 seconds they do a little slam. It only converts 50% of physical to cold, but it comes with a cool geyser, which is sort of like volcanic fissure if it was water instead. But the main part is these guys are just very simple cold melee specters. Now, why is this our choice of specters, so to speak? And when we have frost bearers in the mix, wretched defilers, well, I think those guys are a little bit overused. And the beauty about, I guess, just Path of Exile really is that we can use hatred as our main aura, and not a lot of people use hatred anymore, especially because of the nerf where they removed the more cold damage modifier. But what hatred does is it more or less provides physical as extra cold damage. Now in this game, physical as extra cold is dependent on the base physical damage an attack or spell does. So in our case, let's say we do 1,000, or well, our minions do 1,000 physical damage. Even though they're converting 75% of that to cold, so it ends up being 750 cold damage. If we have 100% physical as extra, that's another 1,000 cold on top of the 750. So it ends up being 1,750 cold damage and 250 physical damage. That's crazy. That's essentially double dipping, and that's before any sort of increased or increased damage taken. More multipliers, all of those taking effect afterwards. So that is the main idea of our build. We're going to scale up hatred, and we're also using this shitty pair of gloves, Grip of the Council. Now, I think I'm one of 2 people right now, PoE Ninja, using this. So if after this video, I start seeing maybe 3 or 5 guys, I'll be happy knowing I left an impact on this league. But this provides 20% of physical as extra cold damage for our minions. That may not seem like a lot, but a level 20 hatred is roughly 40%. So that's kind of like having a free half of a hatred, well, like level 10 hatred. That's not really how that works, I'll be honest. But Grip of the Council, hatred, we're double dipping into our minions damage, and that's basically the whole idea of my build. Okay, so that was me yapping about the main specters, but interestingly enough, we also have a handful of support specters in our build, which this whole double dipping mechanic also works wonders with. Now, the support specters I have in this build is 1 Primal Crush Claw, that's right, Krabby Dude itself, 1 Perfect Forest Warrior, 1 Perfect Forest Tiger, and 1 Perfect Warlord. Now, we have 9 Spectres in total, so that means that almost half of my Spectres, 4, are support Spectres. Typically, most builds wouldn't want to see this, especially because that's a lot of DPS we're ideally losing with stuff like Frost Bearers or Wretched Defilers. But with the way we're scaling our build, because we have so much physical as extra cold damage, and that's not converting or anything like that, all of these minions on their own do some form of physical damage. The Warlord does a lot of physical damage. If you actually check his Leap Slam, it actually does a pretty significant amount, believe it or not. Perfect Force Warrior actually has, I want to say, 75% of his physical converted to fire, but regardless, that's physical base. Perfect Force Tiger will swing every now and then, and it has a nice variety of moves. And Primal Crush Claw, well, it converts to cold, so that guy's essentially a DPS Spectre. But by adding physical as extra cold, all of these support Spectres become sort of like hybrid DPS Spectres in their own right. So let's just talk about Perfect Warlord, for example. His Leap Slam does a little around, I think, 1500 damage or something like that on the top end. Imagine, normally, because we're doing a cold focus build, all that physical damage would not be worth shit. I'll put it bluntly. But 1500 of that damage is cold. Now he's essentially a DPS Spectre alongside everybody else. So this lets me keep all of my nice support Spectres in the same 6 link as our main Spectres, so to speak. And this allows us to dodge having to use a separate 4 link for our support Spectres, like most Raid Spectre builds do. We're already down 4 gem sockets because of the Wraith Lord unique helmet that we have to use because we're playing Spectres. So this, all in all, makes for a really cohesive experience where we can have 9 Spectres that are all worthwhile damage-wise, and we get to not only benefit entirely from the whole double dipping idea, but it also allows us to scale numerous vectors of our build. Okay, so what are those vectors we'll be scaling? First and foremost, we have the actual gain physical as extra cold damage scaling, which we're getting mainly from Grip of Council and Hatred. Now, when I talk about Hatred, that's an aura, so we're going to be scaling a lot of aura effect. Firstly, Paladin gives a little bit of aura effect on the small nodes. We could get some more if we had something like Link skills, but I already did a Flame Link build, so I didn't want to mess with it. And Grip of the Council always takes our glove slots, so we can't use Hand of Phrecia. But Paladin gives, I want to say something like 20% aura effect, so that's that. And then we get a little bit from our Eldritch Implicits on our chest. I think it's 30%, 12%. And then we get a bunch from our tree. There's 2 clusters we take advantage of. One on the very bottom of the tree, because we're starting Duelist. And then one at the top left, Witch and Templar. We get that cluster. And lastly, the big one, Awakened Generosity support. We're not doing any damage because we're a minion build, so Awakened Generosity support more or less helps us essentially double the aura effect of Hatred. Not on its own, but just alongside everything else we mentioned. Uh, that pretty much doubles the effect of Hatred on our minions, so that leads to about, I want to say I'm at like 116, maybe 120% increase extra physical as extra cold. That's quite the mouthful to say. So that's the first thing we do is we get a lot of base cold damage just from this, not conversion, but extra mechanic, gain as extra mechanic. And then we have your very generic increased damage, mostly increased minion damage. Now every minion build gets a fuck ton of increased minion damage, whether it be jewels, like increased minion damage if you used a skill recently, which we're convocating ourselves every now and then. So we have control over that, and we basically get like I think 100 to 200% increased damage just by convocating. And then we get a bunch from the tree. We get a bunch from pretty much everything that a minion build has. You know, the wand, the shield, the rings. We just get a bunch of increased damage, and then that's that. Now we have more damage. Now more damage when it comes to this build in particular, most of our more multipliers are coming from our support gems. Awakened minion damage is big, awakened elemental damage with attacks. All of that adds up. So we have a bunch of more damage, which is a separate multiplier after increased. Now, admittedly, we have something like I think 200, 300%. I haven't really done too much finagling in POB, but we get a lot more damage from the support gems, I'm gonna say, the awakened support gems. So that's more damage. Then lastly, we have enemies taking increased damage. Now, when this happens in PoE, enemies increased damage taken happens last. So that's like a separate more multiplier. That's how I would think about it. We're getting 25% from the Paladin Light of Divinity, I believe it's called, node. Uh, Enemies take 25% increased elemental damage, and then the one that gives you taunt, uh, well, when they're taunted, they take 20% more damage from other targets that's not you. Well, minions, I mean, come on, we're not on minions, minions are on us, so they deal 20% more damage to the enemies, and then we just get a bunch from here and there. Like sometimes Tempest Shield will shock enemies. Awakened Cold Pen gives cold exposure, which makes enemies take more damage. Frostbite lowers resistances, effectively being a part of that. You know, on and on. So that's kind of how this build works. Uh, all together, we have gain physical is extra cold for the base cold damage. Then we have a bunch of increased damage just because we're playing minions. Then we have a bunch of more damage just by way of awakened support gems, you know, maybe something simple like predator support even. That's slightly more damage. And then we have a lot of increased damage taken from our ascendancy, from the crush claw roar. Oh yeah, in case you don't know, crush claws sometimes they'll roar and they'll do like a little screech. I think it's on an 8-second cooldown, and enemies will take 20% increased cold damage, which is what we're doing. So yeah, stuff like that, cold exposure, etc., etc. That's like, I want to say, 3 different multipliers for a lot of base damage. That's how this build is going to be scaled. Now that we've talked about offensive scaling, we're going to talk about defensive scaling. And by defensive scaling, I mean for our minions. Because what's the biggest complaint when people play minions builds? It's that their minions eat shit. Whether that's Spectres, support Spectres, animate Guardians, it's a pretty common complaint. Now, I don't have that complaint because we're investing a ton into our minions defensively as well. First up, we got all the aura effects that we have for hatred. We're also going to use to bring along determination and purity of elements. Now, capping minion res isn't exactly a big deal for a lot of builds because bone rings and just general, not investment, but like most minion builds get to use elemental army on their like support spectre or animate guardian setup, but we don't get that luxury because our specters are our main DPS, and we're also not starting around the minion side of the tree. So I'll have a way to get to that one cluster that gives, you know, PDR, res, chaos res, or whatever. So purity of elements lets me not only way over cap their res for not free, but just with an aura, but also we get to make them immune to elemental ailments, which means they'll never be shocked, they'll never be ignited, they'll never be frozen, and same thing with all of the other ones, which are rare, but you know, sap, scorch, brittle, never. And determination, well, these guys are specters, they're not players, right? Players, they might float around 10k, 20k armor, but minions will be coming in by default with like 60k armor, 100k armor. So determination really juices them up and provides them the physical defensive layer. Then on top of that, we use Bone Offering and I want to say it's called the K Ward minion block cluster near Witch Start. These two things, and I think what's it called, Fortress Covenant, provide our minions max block, which is insane. You know how people love surviving this league, you know, lucky block and all that. Imagine having block cap on minions. So one, they're only taking like 1/4 of the hits they should be. And when they do take it, well, we've juiced up the rest of their defenses so much, they're essentially invulnerable. I've seen these guys walk into T17s, you know, Maven Witnesses, I mean Maven Invitations like the Formed, the Feared, and whatnot. I've seen them tank Shaper Slams, which is like, that's crazy to me. You know, like seeing somebody eat like a Shaper Beam or whatever. But that's what we're doing defensively for our minions. Now, on our own end, we of course benefit from determination and purity of elements as our minions do. So that's pretty nice. We don't have a lot of armor, I'm gonna tell you, so you're not gonna be able to face tank yourself. I have died a few times to, things that I would not have liked to die to. That could be Uber Shaper. One time, I think I died to normal Shaper one time. But stuff like that, and I will say we do have max block. We don't have lucky block. I know that's something you can get from Gladiator, but the Forbidden Jewels are so expensive that I was just like, you know what? Let's get Determined Survivor. Let's cap our block. And what's interesting is this is the first time I think for me I've had max block without stuff like Svalin and without some sort of conditional thing. Like if you play Witch or sorry Necromancer, you probably have that offering note. Now that's cool and all, but sometimes you might actually not have that up. And same thing with Guardian. I think he has a note where he says like every time you attack, you get attack block, and every time you use a spell, you get spell block. You might be down one of those. Like if you're just standing there using Convocation, you might not have attack block. And if you're just shield charging, you might not have spell block. So it's nice to not have conditional block cap. But either way, we are block capped. That's my choice here. You can go for spell suppression if you want to shift some of your tree over, but I don't think it'll be worth it, personally speaking. But and then we have 5,000 life and then a bunch of life regen just from consecrated ground, and we have vitality on our perfect warlord and all of that. But that's the defensive side of the build. It's nothing amazing on our own end, but for our minions, dude, I'm telling you, these guys are gonna be just ultra tanky. And that's what really matters, especially because these guys have, I think, a quarter of the health of Crush Claws. So, whatever we can do to keep them alive, it's gonna be more damage for us. It's gonna feel better for us. It's gonna be a peace of mind for us. Okay, so now I'm gonna bounce around and kind of talk about the gears and the skills of the build a little bit. That's not anything crazy in what I'm about to talk about, but I do want to just point out some things here and there that may be different than the usual Spectre builds that people are accustomed to. And I already mentioned that I'm not running a support Spectre for Link, so there's good reason why I'm using what gem slots I do have for the things I am using, I guess. Weird sense. But first up, we have the actual 6 link of Ray Spectres. I'm currently using Awakened Melee Physical Damage, Awakened Minion Damage, Awakened Cold Pen, Awakened Elemental Damage with attacks, and Predator Support. Now, some of these may be a bit kind of eyebrow raising. We'll start with Awakened Melee Physical Damage. The way conversion and physical as extra works in PoE is that the more multiplier on melee physical damage does still apply to the entire skill. It'll only apply it once, but the more it does work with it. And more importantly, it does also give 10% chance to intimidate enemies, which just gives a little bit more increased damage taken. Granted, it's increased physical damage taken, but since all of our guys still do some form of physical damage, this does end up being quite the number booster. I think Ruthless and Awakened Elemental Focus and Awakened the Multi-Strike, which is like 200 dibs, may be better than this, but for the price of it, really, this is a great support gem that I think is pretty good in what I'm doing. If you want to use Awakened Elemental Focus instead, it's totally fine. I was doing that for pretty much most of its build's lifetime, but just remember you're not going to be able to freeze or chill or shock, really. I'm not sure if anyone minion shock. I know Syndicate Silencer did when I was using it, but anyways, you won't be able to freeze or chill, which is a pretty nice pseudo defensive layer. So that's that. And then I'm gonna talk about Predator support. Now, Predator support is really kind of like the sixth link. Like if there was anything I'd swap out, it would be this slot right here with Predator support. Predator support is great because you can kind of direct all of your minions to target an enemy. Because I've been doing destructive play and juiced harvest and all of that, uh, I think it's pretty important that I have this on, only because there's, so many bosses and all that stuff, and I want to make sure all my minions are targeting the same guy. But aside from that, it's just another more multiplier. So if you want, you could just again throw in elemental focused. Empower is a really cheapo option in here. I don't think Empower is that good, but if you like for whatever reason don't like Predator support, I know I'm not the biggest fan of it just because it's like a second curse pretty much. Feel free to use like Empower instead. I also put in item rarity sometimes when I'm really down bad for gold. But yeah, that would be my skill gems here in the main 6 link. And then another thing I want to point out, if you look at the rest of my build, like on POB and whatnot, you will probably understand everything I use. But I just want to bring up that auto exertion with General's Cry. It is a 2 socket setup for us to get taunt so that we can take advantage of bring the battle on our ascendancy. This allows us to taunt every 3 seconds, but I want to just quickly say, because we're running Perfect Warlord, I'm pretty sure his War Cry taunts too, because he uses Enduring Cry. I'm not exactly sure where the priorities lay in the game when he shouts and then we shout, but either way, taunt lasts exactly 3 seconds, so having I think we have a little bit of cooldown recovery, so ours isn't exactly 3 seconds, it's a little less. But we basically shout every 3 seconds, we get the taunt, bring the battle, gets essentially full uptime. That's good enough for me. But again, I'm not sure how much Warlord is fucking us over. But if you don't like Warlord, I guess you could just swap him out for another DPS Spectre. So yeah. And then let's talk about the gear. Now, most of the gear at this point in the league, if you haven't seen another video talking about how to craft, say, a +2 minion wand or +2 boots or whatever, you could probably find it. I'm not gonna waste your time talking about that. What I am gonna waste your time talking about is, first of all, the ring, which is all tier 1. It's plus int, plus life, plus chaos, minion damage, minion attack and cast speed, and non-channeling. Crafted on, of course. I got this through the Recombinator. Now, getting a fuck ton of bone rings is probably hard to buy in bulk now at this point in the league. But you just buy a bunch of these, you go one mod at a time. So I just alt rolled until I got, like, let's say max life, and then I alt rolled until I got max minion damage. You recombinate those together until you have one rare ring with 2 prefixes. And then you do the same thing for the suffixes. So I rolled until I got, we'll just say max chaos res, max int, slam those together. Now I have 2 rings, right? One has 2 prefixes, one has 2 suffixes. You're gonna multi-mod, craft multi-mod on both of those, and then you're going to craft 2 modifiers that you can't chaos or all roll on. That could most likely be syndicate mods. I use those ones that give adds fire damage, adds cold damage on the prefix, and then just anything that said like when you focus on the suffix. Those are usually, well, not usually, those are exclusive modifiers. So you'll end up with 2 rings with 5 mods on each. One is multi-mod, one is multi-mod, and then 2 exclusives on both, and then 2 prefixes, 2 suffixes you want. Slam those together, you end up with 4. Well, ideally, you end up with 4 mods that you really want, and then probably a crafted mod that you can just remove. And then you repeat the process with the last mod. In our case, it's a suffix, I believe. In my example, it would be like minions attack cast speed. You just craft another ring that has 2 suffixes, but this time one of the suffixes is that last one you want. Then you repeat the process again, but with the 4 mod ring you created earlier, until you end up with a 5 mod ring. Now, I'm not exactly sure how good that explanation was, but there's a lot of videos at this point on how to recombinate in Settlers League, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. That's how I made my ring. Now, if you thought my ring was crazy, introduce to you the shield. The shield is kind of like the ring, but it's a shaper base. Now, for what it's worth, looking at this shield is kind of crazy, and I only made this because I fucking hate people. Well, I don't hate people. I hate the fact that so many people are using Savala nowadays, but Savala isn't really that crazy. At least now that I've used it like I think 4 times across a couple different builds, I don't think Savannah's that crazy. This shield, however, is probably that crazy. We get +1 minion skill gems, we get plus minion damage, which we are missing by the way because we're not exactly um, in the best spots to get all that minion damage, and then we get recover life on block, and then we also get res, life, and all of that. But crafting this took a couple of shaper bases, I'll be honest with you. I'm not exactly sure how big the market is on shaper fossilized spirit shields right now, but if it helps, you can just coin flip the base by doing your accommodators where you have one base with mods you want. That's just a normal spirit shield, and then one shaper base with the things you want, because it would just be a coin flip which base the accommodating system chooses. Either way, this shield is probably going to be unobtainable, um, at least 1 for 1. And I don't even have tier 1 minion damage because it just takes so many ults to hit it. So if you're going to recreate this, I would recommend just finding one with um, recover life on block, life, and then one of the minion mods. I think those will get you to the same boat. But those are just two uniques I wanted to point out. Not uniques, I guess unique rare items. In terms of actual uniques, we don't really have anything that isn't too understandable. Grip of the Council is kind of like the worst, well, one of the cheapest pair of gloves ever. Like, I don't think anybody's ever used this. All's Uprising for Determination is like 1 div now, 2 divs maybe. When I bought it, it was like 12 divs, so it is what it is. We do use not determined survivor on the Forbidden Flame and Flesh. Now, these jewels, you could go for the ones that give you lucky block, but they were like super expensive when I last looked. Probably because Gazzy was using them, but and just because it's lucky block. But determined survivor gives us basically 50% chance to block on the shield, no matter what the actual number is, and that's pretty good. That essentially gets us the block cap, and again, block cap unconditional is rather incredible. That it's not better than lucky block, of course, because lucky block would be like 90% chance to block, but 78%, I'm not complaining. And lastly, the large cluster jewel. This is just your typical increased effect cluster jewel, and I could probably go get a better one at this point with all the money I have stashed up, but I want to point out that getting plus dexterity on this is really nice. We do need a lot of dexterity for this build, so make sure that you get. If you don't get this here, you're gonna have to get a tier 1 roll on probably one of your rares instead. And that's gonna be a little awkward. You can use the ones on the skill tree, but I mean, that's up to you. I'm not exactly a fan of doing that. And speaking of the skill tree, let's take a quick look at it. You'll notice it's pretty also understandable. I just immediately went down, took the aura cluster, and then went up for the minion nodes and whatnot. Do make sure that, again, you get decay wood. Decay wood gets your minions to cap block, and without that node, your minions are gonna eat shit, and nobody likes that. I do use a couple of nodes for the lightning res tattoos. Those are pretty cheap, but it was just a nice way to make sure I was overcapped on lightning res. Everything on the tree, I actually don't think there's anything I really need to talk about. The minions have increased AoE mastery. Is actually pretty important. I actually think it's a pretty good node. Plus minion accuracy. You probably won't need this if you can find blind on hit on one of your jewels. But I had this pretty much all the way until I was level like 95, 97. And let's see. Oh, we put Quickening Covenant in the top right because usually you want this in your like small clusters, or you want this in your clusters so that it doesn't have that radius effect take into effect because there won't be any notables. But funnily enough, I put it in the top right because I don't take any notables in the top right. So it's the same effect. But if you do end up taking Enduring Bond, which I'm not sure why you would, it's not like the greatest cluster for minion wise because we're using permanent minions. Just watch out for that. I mean, minions have reduced movement speed. It's kind of brutal, but all in all, that should be it for gear and skills and just general tree. Alright, now the last point I'm going to talk about in this build is going to be alternatives for the main Spectres, only because what kind of person would I be if I were to diss the meta Spectres and then only tell you one cool Spectre to try using instead in this build? So firstly, I'm gonna get the easiest one out the way. Primal Crush Claws, the Krabby Boys. If you can't, for the love of you, or you're an SSF or something, and you can't really find your Forge Warriors, just use Crush Claws instead. They are gonna be again, probably less than two, one third or 2/3 of the damage, but those guys will still do the same thing and they'll still look cool. So yeah, that's the first option. But let's get into some actual meaty options. We got Perfect Naval Warrior, not warrior, officer up first. These guys used to be pretty hyped over when they came out during Affliction League because they used to provide Fortify. Now, they don't provide Fortify anymore, and they only provide a shitty Precision Aura, but that's okay, because we're going to be using them for damage. Now, when it comes to their damage, the first thing you'll find is that they actually do a little bit more base damage than Forge Warriors do, at least with their default attack. I think they cap out at 1800 attack, but more importantly, they have a wide variety of additional attacks and spells that really go crazy. They have this Fiora looking attack from League of Legends, where by the way, it also has like 1800 base attack, but it has 100% physical converted to cold and it always freezes. And then the other one has just 75% physical converted to cold. But these attacks are really nice, and not only are they really nice, but they'll also benefit from all of our, well, attack-based support. So that's that. But they also have a nice variety of spells that are pretty insane. They have a geyser themselves. They have some mortars, but they have this cannon fire ability that just, I don't know why. I feel like the animation itself is in 30 FPS. Like even if my game is running at 60 or 140 or whatever, this, I don't know why. I'm not sure if the footage will show it, but I feel like the virtual like fake clutter they provide is like super low frames. But that does, the cannon fire does physical damage, 1600 I believe at the cap, physical damage. So that will just be not converted but turned into extra cold. But lastly, they have this huge tidal wave that I don't believe it moves enemies. I haven't been sure, but it does a lot of cold damage. It doesn't do any physical damage, and I'm actually not sure what the number itself is because it doesn't have it on PODB. But it seems to work, and if it's just visual effect and like it turns out there's no damage, I'm not gonna cry over it. But I don't feel like it does any significant damage. But and I would imagine it wouldn't do any physical damage. So that's my notes on that. The footage in the background, if you like seeing that, if you like having your computer blown up, feel free to, I guess. But speaking of computers getting blown up, Demon of the Drowned that comes in. Unlike the last guys, these guys aren't actual corpses. You'll have to find them in T17 maps. But if you have those, any way to get T17 mobs in your map, whether that's the more difficult and rewarding pack modifier on idols or cartography scarab of the multitude, I want to say it's called. You'll find these guys. They look like Aatrox. They're usually flying around and throwing water, like huge water skills at you. These guys don't actually do that much single target damage, but their clear is rather fantastic if they don't mind me saying that. They have a pretty nice variety of spells that they use I think every 3 seconds. They have a bunch of tornado summoning abilities. All of those do cold damage and just cold damage, but the I want to bring up the water spout ability they have. I'm pretty sure this shit should not. I don't know if the numbers are right because it says it does 9k to 14k cold damage. That's a lot. That's like almost triple your health pool. And that maybe that's just for them to us, but that's pretty insane. Either way, their attack skill isn't as good as the other attack skills, even though they have more base damage. You can see that they have 1900. These guys don't get the more damage multipliers that I think the other guys come with innately, and also they attack a bit slowly, and they're too busy using their spells to really use the swing. Oh, and it only converts 60 fizz to cold, so either way, these guys are what I'm currently using. at the time of recording this video, which should be March 23rd, than what I'm currently using. But Forge Warriors will probably be better, not only in single target, but in generic, like, I'm going to say not close range, but like just generic activities, whether that's mapping or if you're doing essences or something ritual. But these guys are just, if you want to lean more towards like 60-40 clear single target, I would recommend these guys. And the Perfect Naval Officers, because I forgot to give them a rating, those guys I would actually just give as a solid 50-50. Actually think they do a little bit more. Perfect Naval Officers, that is. I think they do a little bit more single target damage on average, but the problem is your computer, I mean, the amount of visual clutter, that's the real trade-off when you use those guys. And these guys, I mean, dude, visual clutter, fucking single target damage, who needs those? You know, we could just blow up maps with cool water abilities. Next up, I have Hyri's Watch or Hiri's Watch. I'm not sure how this is pronounced. This is an old Spectre that people used to use in 3.21, 3.22, when K Gaming was still around making dope minion builds. Now, these guys are just pretty much bow characters. They're just like rangers that use like, I think their attacks have 75% convert, and they have a snipe that's also 75% convert. The only reason I'm not a fan of these at the moment is because all of our attack supports generally benefit melee attacks for everybody else because our support specters are also melee attackers. But if you want to use these guys, well, now you have to use stuff like Awakened Vicious Projectiles, Awakened GMP, Volley support, stuff like that. And the more we kind of dilute our support gems with those, the less our support specters can actually be DPS hybrids, and now they're just relegated to being support like Orobots, which is what we're doing anyways. So I don't really like these guys in this build, but I will tell you I did try them, and they're not the worst, especially with all the extra physical is cold. I mean, if you would rather do a build where you have like 8 of these guys and just use a full, range support gem sort of idea, that would work out just fine. And so in that scenario, I actually don't think the single target would be too bad, but I would say that's definitely another 60 clear, 40 single target. But I'll be honest, if you have the right support and maybe even I'm not sure returning projectiles works, but maybe include that too, and you might have a nasty single target build if you were to run 8 high reach watches. And lastly, I want to talk about the worst option possible. Don't try these. I haven't even tried them. I sat down, I looked at them, and I was just like, why would you ever do this? Perfect frozen cannibals. So these guys, firstly, they are corpses. Oh, I forgot to mention Hyri's watches. You can find those in Legion emblems, Karui emblems, I believe. They're pretty easy to find. You just get yourself a timeless Karui emblem, get yourself another timeless emblem, and you'll find yourself a Hyri's watch in no time. But perfect frozen cannibals, these guys are ritual corpses. Uh, they have a variety of attacks and spells, but they require, I believe, a perfect fiery cannonball to become empowered so that they can use those. Now, that means that you have to give up another Spectre slot just to run one perfect fiery cannonball. And then after that, now the question is, are these guys worth it? Well, first of all, their default attack doesn't even convert any physical. So we're losing out on a big chunk of damage there. So with that in mind, we now have their spells and other attacks to think through. Well, their main attack is Glacial Hammer, which has pretty low base damage. I'm not sure if Crush Claw is lower, but it's pretty low. And they only convert 50 physical damage to cold. That sucks. That's just not good. And after that, you're probably wondering, okay, well, what about the spells? Well, their spells are actually busted. They have a form of Glacial Cascade with 1800 physical damage and 100% physical damage converted to cold. That's awesome. But then you realize that these guys like to use Glacial Hammer instead of Glacial Cascade. So if there's like an enemy close enough to them, I feel like they just swing, go up and start swinging. When instead, if they could only use Glacial Cascade, which also comes with, I believe, Ice Nova, by the way, if they're empowered. But if we could have these guys only use Cascade, that would be it. This would be a much better form of the build because then you could scale with like Spell Echo and Control Destruction and all of that, and this guy would be busted. Unfortunately for us, he likes to use Glacial Hammer. So don't use these guys. They're gonna just feel super awkward, and you're just gonna hate it when you see him walk up and start swinging. If they were only Glacial Cascade, that would be a million times better. Maybe in some perfect utopian future, the devs would let us pick what kind of minion we want from them. But yeah, as long as that Glacial Hammer's on here, don't use this guy. Probably like 30-30, honestly. It doesn't even add up to 100. It just sucks on both ends. But yeah, so those are some alternatives you can use if you don't want to use Forge Warriors or if you just can't find them. Alright, so that's pretty much it for my Paladin Forge Warrior Spectres. I will mention that the primary things I've been farming on this build is Maven Destructive Play, just because, I mean, the single target in this build is pretty crazy, and the less clear we really have to do, the better we can kind of cope and feel. And then after that, I did a lot of Alva farming because temples are kind of easy and pretty simple. I do love me some temples. Veiled Ore farming, Katarina. Now, I say Veiled Ore farming, but I think I've only gotten like 2 out of the 10 maybe Katarinas I've done this league. And right now, I am doing a form of harvest farming. It's just crop rotation, T16s, a little bit of Maven in there. Uh, this build is actually pretty good for crop rotation because everything's nice and packed together, and you do need that single target for the big rares and uniques and all that you get. So that's what I'm currently farming in case you need some sort of direction on what this build's good for. I'm sure this would be busted in Delve as well, and if you get more clear-esque monsters, you know, those perfect naval officers, you could definitely take this out to Ritual. Maybe not Legion. Actually, I don't think you'd be able to take this out to Legion, but the world's your oyster. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions or whatnot. I'll be more than happy to answer them. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Later.